Under a sky the color of ash, the earth drank the blood of two empires. Bodies lay scattered across the endless grass, their armor glinting faintly like broken stars. The air trembled with the last breath of horses, and the silence that followed was heavier than the weight of crowns. This was not the field of a noble war. It was a graveyard of ambition carved into the bones of the steppe. In that forsaken place, the greatest conqueror the world had ever known met a woman who feared neither death nor kings. Cyrus the Great had crossed deserts, toppled dynasties, and bent nations to his will. For 3 decades, his empire stretched like a shadow from the Mediterranean to the mountains of the east. Yet here, far from his golden capitals, his destiny unraveled in the hands of a queen born from the dust. Her name was Tomyris. To the Persians, she was a barbarian. To her people, she was the storm that guarded their freedom. She rode not in silk, but in armor blackened by smoke, her hair tangled with wind, her eyes fixed on vengeance rather than glory. When Cyrus sent her a proposal of marriage, she saw not a union, but an attempt to conquer without battle. And so she answered with silence, the kind that precedes war. History remembers the clash that followed as a story of strategy and slaughter. But beneath it all lies something deeper, a mother's grief, a queen's fury, and the moment when power met a heart that would not yield. He ruled the world, but she ruled vengeance. If you believe that history is written not by the victors, but by the survivors, subscribe to our channel, where the silence of queens still drowns the roar of empires. Before her name was ever whispered in fear, the world belonged to Cyrus. His empire was a masterpiece of ambition, a living map of conquest that stretched from the blue edge of the Aegean to the frozen peaks of the Hindu Kush. Cities fell before his armies like candles blown out in a storm, and yet he was hailed not only as a warrior, but as a man of mercy. He freed slaves, spared kings, and cloaked domination beneath the language of civilization. To those who bent the knee, he offered protection. To those who resisted, he offered ruin disguised as order. Beneath his banners, the world learned to call submission peace. But far beyond the reach of palaces and paved roads where no empire could draw borders, there lived a people who bowed to no king. The Massagetae roamed the vast steppes of Central Asia, where survival was a creed written in blood and dust. Their world was not built of stone, but of wind and bone. They drank the milk of mares they feasted after battle, and they carried war like a birthright. Among them, the gods were not worshipped in temples, but in the rhythm of the hunt and the heat of combat. In this land, women fought beside men, their hands as steady on the bowstring as on the reins. Leadership was not inherited, but earned with scars. A ruler was not chosen by divine decree, but proven by endurance, by the ability to command death and survive it. From such fire rose Tomyris, daughter of the steppes, her name meaning iron in the tongue of her ancestors. She was not molded for diplomacy or luxury. She was born from the roar of hooves and the hiss of arrows, a creature of instinct and precision. Her people followed her not out of fear, but out of recognition that she embodied the unforgiving truth of their world. When Cyrus looked northward and saw these nomads, he did not see equals. He saw a final frontier to be tamed, a woman's realm to be folded into his legend. His envoys carried to Tomyris an offer dressed as alliance but sharpened with pride. The great King of Kings proposed marriage, a gesture meant to bind her lands to his throne without shedding blood. Tomyris read the message in silence. She saw no honor in the gilded promise, only the chains hidden beneath its words. Her answer came like the edge of a blade. She refused him not with insult, but with defiance so clear that it echoed through the desert winds. And for the first time in his long reign, Cyrus felt something unfamiliar beneath his crown. It was not love nor even anger. It was humiliation. For many nights after her refusal, Cyrus could not sleep. The words of the queen followed him through the halls of his palace, quieter than whispers, yet heavier than iron. He had crushed empires and humbled kings, but no victory had ever wounded his pride like a single woman's defiance. To his court, he spoke little. To his generals, he said only this: the queen of the north would kneel or the steppe would burn. The campaign began at dawn beneath a sky of ash and gold. Columns of men stretched across the plain, their spears rising like reeds in a flood. As they advanced northward, the lush valleys of Persia faded into barren wind. Villages disappeared, then roads, then even the memory of shade. Still, Cyrus pressed on. Each mile was an act of will against the void itself. At last, the army reached the banks of the Jaxartes, the river that guarded the lands of the Massagetae. Its waters were fast and cold, a moving border between worlds. Cyrus studied it in silence before ordering a bridge built. He watched the engineers drive stakes into the mud, the ropes pulling tight against the current, and when it was done, he crossed first. Behind him came thousands, the sound of their armor rolling like thunder across the new path into enemy land. Beyond the river, there was nothing. No smoke, no riders, no resistance. Only the vast silence of the steppe. Scouts rode ahead and returned with the same report. The Massagetae were retreating. They were moving deeper into the plains, abandoning camps and herds, as if fear had broken their resolve. Cyrus took it as a sign of divine favor. He had won without a fight, he told his men. The queen had chosen to flee rather than face him, but the silence was her weapon. The retreat was her answer. Every step the Persians took carried them farther from their supplies, from water, from the rhythm of the land. Then one morning they found a camp. Fires still smoldered. Horses wandered freely. Amphorae of wine stood open beside tents filled with bread and meat. It was as if the enemy had fled in panic, leaving behind a feast for their conquerors. Cyrus ordered the attack. The defenders were few, scattered, gone. Victory felt easy, too easy. As the sun fell, the soldiers drank from the spoils, their laughter rising through the wind. They did not know the trap was already closing. Before dawn, the Persians returned to the camp they had abandoned. They fell upon the drunken Massagetae like wolves. The slaughter was swift and merciless. When it ended, the ground was red and silent again. Among the captives was a young warrior with eyes like tempered steel. Spargapais's son of Tomyris. His capture would ignite the kind of war that no empire survives. The prisoners were taken south to the Persian lines, bound and silent beneath the burning sun. Among them, Spargapaises walked with his head unbowed, his hands chained, yet his eyes steady. Cyrus looked upon him with the curiosity of a man studying a rare and dangerous creature. The young warrior bore his mother's pride. He did not plead. He did not curse. He simply stood before the conqueror, as if defeat were only another wound to endure. Cyrus ordered that the prince be treated with honor. Wine was offered, bread laid before him, and envoys sent to deliver the news to the queen. He believed this capture would bend her will, that no mother could bear to see her son in foreign chains. But Tomyris did not weep. When the messengers arrived, she listened in silence, her gaze fixed beyond them toward the horizon, where her son had last ridden. Only after they finished did she speak, her voice steady as the wind over the plain. She dictated a message to be carried back to Cyrus. The words were sharp, but measured heavy with the weight of a mind that knew how to strike without raising a blade. She told him that his victory was hollow, that he had trapped not warriors, but hunger and pride. She offered peace in exchange for her son's return. She promised to withdraw her army beyond the river, to leave his empire untouched. Then she wrote a single line meant to pierce the armor of his pride. She said that the great King of Kings should not boast of capturing a child when he could not defeat a mother in open battle. When Cyrus read the letter, he smiled. It was the smile of a man too certain of his own strength. He refused her offer and sent word that the prince would be kept as a guest until the queen came herself to ask for him. He believed the promise of mercy would weaken her resolve. He never understood that mercy was a foreign language to a people who worshipped the god of war. In the nights that followed, Spargopaises sat alone in his tent, untouched food beside him. The guards spoke of how he stared at the stars, as if waiting for an answer from the sky. On the third dawn, he asked for his bonds to be loosened. They obeyed, thinking he sought to eat. Instead, he seized a Persian blade and drove it through his own heart. His blood darkened the ground where he fell, and with it the last illusion of peace. When the news reached Tomyris, she did not speak for a long time. Those who stood near her said she neither cried nor moved. Then she rose, walked to the center of her camp, and lifted her hands to the sun. Her voice carried across the wind, calm and unshaken. She swore before the god of light that she would give Cyrus his fill of blood. Not the blood of conquest, but the blood of reckoning. The steppe fell silent, as if even the earth held its breath. Vengeance had found its shape. The day her son died, the steppe changed. Smoke no longer rose only from campfires, but from the forges where vengeance was born. Tomyris rode from tribe to tribe, her hair unbound, her voice carrying through the cold air like a command from the gods. She called upon every clan that had ever bled under a foreign banner, every warrior who had lost kin to conquest. From the east came riders wrapped in wolfskins. From the west came archers with eyes the color of dust. One by one they gathered around her until the plain trembled beneath the weight of hooves. The Massagetae were not an army in the way Cyrus understood. They were a living storm. Each warrior carried a composite bow of horn and sinew curved like the crescent moon. Their arrows could pierce armor at a distance no Persian had trained to defend. They rode horses that knew the wind better than the whip beasts that could cross rivers without rest and find water where none was seen. They moved with a rhythm older than cities, their formation shifting like the tide. They struck, vanished, and returned again before the enemy could breathe. Tomyris rode at the front, her spear raised high, her armor blackened by the ashes of her camp. To her people, she was no longer only queen. She was the fire that refused to die. The command she gave was simple. No man would return across the river. The battle began at dawn. Mist hung over the Jaxartes, pale and cold. The Persians, weary from long marches and thinned by distance from their supply lines, formed ranks beside the water. They expected a frontal charge, but none came. Instead, the air filled with a sound like rain. Arrows fell from every direction, cutting through the fog, finding joints in armor eyes beneath helmets. The horses screamed and broke formation. The steppe itself seemed to move thousands of riders circling the camp in widening spirals. Cyrus shouted for his men to stand, his voice lost beneath the thunder of hooves. He tried to rally his guard to form the iron wall that had once crushed nations, but the rhythm of the battle belonged to another world now. His soldiers were heavy trapped between the river and the endless plain. Their armor slowed them. Their discipline betrayed them. They fought the wind and found it sharper than their blades. When the sun broke through the clouds, the river ran red. Cyrus fell somewhere in the chaos, his crown trampled into the mud, his name echoing for the last time beneath the cries of dying men. No banner remained standing. The empire that had stretched across continents now knelt to the silence of the steppe. But for Tomyris, the battle's end brought no peace. She stood among the bodies, her face unreadable. The man who had taken her son lay dead, yet the ache within her did not fade. His death was a wound answered by another wound. The gods had not yet balanced the scales. Something more was owed. The battle had ended, but the air still trembled with the weight of what had been done. The steppe lay littered with bodies, the armor of the fallen, glinting weakly beneath a sun already sinking into smoke. Ravens circled above in slow, patient spirals. Between them moved the queen, her horse stepping carefully over the ruins of men and empire. Tomyris searched without speaking, her eyes fixed on the horizon, and then on the ground, as if guided by something older than grief. She found him at last, near the riverbank, half buried in mud, his royal cloak torn and blackened, the crown of Persia lying beside him like a discarded lie. The man who had been called great was no longer a conqueror, only a shell emptied by his own ambition. Tomyris dismounted and knelt beside the body. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, her face unreadable, her breath steady. Around her, the steppe held its silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. The queen gave her command. Her warriors brought forward a large skin made from the hide of a fallen soldier. Into it, they poured the blood of the Persians who had died for their king. The liquid darkened and steamed in the evening light, thick and heavy as memory itself. The ritual began not in cruelty, but in reverence. Among the Massagetae blood was the essence of spirit, the bridge between life and what lay beyond. To drown an enemy's head in blood was not an act of desecration. It was judgment made holy. When the preparation was complete, Tomyris drew her sword and severed the head of Cyrus from his body. The sound of the blade faded quickly into the wind. She lifted the head with both hands, her gaze unwavering, and carried it to the skin filled with blood. Then, standing before her people, she spoke with a voice that carried across the plain. "I am alive, and I have conquered you in battle. Yet you have destroyed me by taking my son with treachery. But I will fulfill my promise and give you your fill of blood." She lowered the head into the crimson pool. The blood rose and covered the hollow eyes. A slow ripple spread across the surface and stilled. The act was complete. The queen turned away. No cheer followed, no song, only the steady rustle of the wind through the grass. To the Persians, it would become a tale of savagery. To her people, it was a sacred, closing the binding of a restless spirit so that it could do no more harm. As the sun sank behind the hills, its light spilled across the steppe like dying embers. The battlefield glowed red and gold, then faded into shadow. Tomyris stood for a final moment, the wind moving through her hair, her face lit by the last light of day. Then she mounted her horse and rode away, leaving behind the silence of the dead and the weight of her vow fulfilled. News of the battle spread like wind through the old world. Traders carried it along the silk roads, priests whispered it in temples, and soldiers repeated it beside their campfires. The tale of the queen who had slain the greatest conqueror alive crossed mountains and seas, changing with every voice that told it, but never losing its awe. In the courts of Greece, they called her the Avenger of the Steppes. In Persia, her name was spoken only in mourning. To the nomads, she became more than a queen. She was the spirit of their freedom, the proof that no crown could chain the horizon. Herodotus would later write of her with both fear and admiration. To him, she was the mirror of all that empire could not tame. Others followed, repeating her story as both warning and legend. They said that when she rode into battle, even the gods turned their faces away. They said her oath to the sun had changed the sky itself. The truth, perhaps, was simpler. Tomyris had shown the world that power without restraint consumes itself, and that grief, when bound to honor, can become the sharpest blade of all. Across centuries, her legacy endured. The tactics she used on the open steppe, the fluid motion of mounted archers, the art of striking and vanishing, would echo through the ages. The Scythians would learn from her storms. The Huns would carry her fire westward. The Mongols would ride with her shadow at their side. Every empire that rose from the dust would one day meet her lesson written in wind. To face a people who fight for their own sky is to fight the earth itself. Yet beyond the stories of war and vengeance, her memory lived in the silence that followed. The steppe returned to grass. The bones of soldiers sank into the soil, and the river once again carried clear water. The Massagetae rode on free, as before, their queen's name whispered in the dawn like a prayer. She had not sought immortality, but the world gave it to her all the same. Empires fall not to armies, but to the hearts that refuse to bow. The sun set on her story, as it had on so many kingdoms, but the light that burned within her did not fade. It lived in every act of defiance, in every voice that dared to rise against conquest. And somewhere in the vastness of the steppe, where no monuments stand and no marble remembers, the wind still carries her vow. If you believe that vengeance can outlive kings, subscribe to our channel, where history bleeds through the silence of queens.